Hello there, and welcome to the microphone lecture for vocal techniques and vocal production classes here at Full Sail University. I'm Ed Tinley. I'm the course director of both classes, and I'm going to be comparing and contrasting the different microphone types in this lecture. Before I get into looking at the different microphones and listening, let's talk about what I feel like is one of the most important factors when capturing the human voice, and that is room ambience. How much room tone or room reverb are you going to record along with the direct sound of the human voice? If you don't pay mind to this, you could end up with a lot of unwanted overtones in your recording, and this can give you some problems when you get into editing and mixing later on. So with a lot of commercial productions, whether we're talking voiceover, dialogue recording, working with a singer, in modern production, typically we try to record a direct vocal sound. Does this mean you always have to go about it this way? Absolutely not. But if we're talking about something that you're going to heavily compress or something that you're going to edit extensively, whether it be comping, time editing with, elastic audio and stretching and squeezing, pitch shifting with Melodyne or Auto-Tune. If you have a lot of extra reflections in with the direct sound, that can confuse some of these plugins or confuse some of these processes that you're going to do later on down the road. So typically we're going to try and get rid of reflections as much as we can. It doesn't have to be bone dry, but a bit more direct sound than reflective sound is usually what you want to end up with. With this microphone, it has such a tight polar pattern. My sound is pretty direct right now, but let me just show you the room that I'm in. I'm in the old Studio B here at Full Sail. I say old because it's the oldest room on campus, and if I just pan around here, it's a really large room. I want to say it's probably, I'm guessing, about 1,500 square feet. If I bring it up here, it has probably 20, 25-foot ceilings. It's made out of all concrete. It's just a concrete bunker in here. We have parallel walls going on. We have a big piece of studio glass. So what I'm getting at here, there's a lot of reflective surfaces in this room, and that's what creates all the room reverb that's going on in here. If I clap my hands, you can hear almost, I would say, close to 1 second of decay time in this room. So this room is really, sought after to record big rock drums in or really loud guitars. For vocals, it can give us a little bit of fits, because if I pull off this mic a little bit, say I'm about 5 inches off it now, I get almost as much reflective sound as I do the direct sound that I had before. So mic placement, controlling these reflections. If you're in this type of room, we're probably going to have to put up some type of baffling. I have a couple small baffles behind me, but I didn't want to deaden it up so much that you guys couldn't hear the ambience going on in here. So to combat this, we'd probably build a little fort, put a couple large baffles behind the singer, put a couple smaller ones in front. Sometimes people go so far as to even put up a heavy packing blanket on top of the booth to give it a little ceiling to cut even more reflections down. And this would be for dealing with a singer. Now, if I'm in a beautiful sounding room and I have a very organic recording going on, I'm doing acoustic instruments. I have an acoustic guitar. I have a piano. I mean, recording a little bit of this natural reverb might sound really, really cool. And what's really great about it, it's unique. No plug-in in the world or rack piece of gear is going to sound like the ambience in this room. So with most things musical and artistic, there are no rules, and if somebody tries to make one, then maybe we should break it. But one solid guideline I will give you when it comes to vocal production or techniques, whether it is voiceover, dialogue, singing, be aware of how much room ambience you are capturing. Also be aware of the fast first reflection, that initial first delay when, say, a sound, say if I speak into this microphone, it takes, say, 1 millisecond to get into the mic, the direct sound. But say it takes 2 milliseconds for the sound to travel to the back wall, hit off it hard, come bouncing back into the mic. If that reflection's strong enough, that could give me some phase cancellation. What that's going to do to your sound, it's going to affect the tone or the EQ curve of what you're capturing. For singing, this is really not a bad setup if this is going to be in a music track. But if this is voiceover or dialogue, there probably is just plain too much verb in here, and I should choose a different room. Okay, so now that we've talked about reflections and how important they are, let's look at the microphone types. Right now, I'm speaking on a dynamic microphone, and I chose this microphone because it's the most focused. It has the smallest polar pattern going on in front of the mic. If I were to try a condenser that has a much larger diaphragm, I would probably immediately start picking up a lot more ambience. But if I'm trying to focus the sound, I want something very direct, this is a very fine choice. And dynamic microphones, a lot of these were created for recording voiceover or dialogue, especially this one right here, the Shure SM7B. There's the Sennheiser 421 out there. There's the Electro Voice RE20. These are some other very popular dynamic mics. Are they used all the time on voices? No. The one problem with them they require a pretty good preamp. You're going to have to give them probably about 40, 50 dB of gain to compete, to say, with a much hotter condenser mic. So they are going to take a good preamp. If you don't have a good quiet preamp, then you might want to try a condenser instead. But definitely, if you're in a room that has tons of reflections in it, then the dynamic is a very good choice. Another good thing about a dynamic for vocals is it takes transients very well. So if you have a very aggressive singer, somebody that screams, a very aggressive rapper, somebody with quick changes from soft to loud, the dynamic microphone will capture that waveform much cleaner than, say, a condenser or a ribbon, which could pop or actually distort. The ribbon mics we'll look at. Ribbons, I'm a huge fan of them. I'm really glad that they've made a comeback over the last decade or so. Ribbons were usually associated with vintage sounding recordings, more boutique of a sound where it's, it sounds like a throwback. Ribbons sound old. They sound like antiques. They're very mellow. They're very round. They're not as hyped on the high end as their condenser and dynamic counterparts. So I love them for their smooth, organic feel. And they give you it's just a different tone than you normally would experience with one of the other microphone types. Remember, they are figure 8 only. They only have one pattern. So you're going to get as much sound from in front of the mic as you are from the back of the mic when using a ribbon. Condensers are definitely king when it comes to vocal recording. This is the most common microphone type because of that exaggerated high frequencies that they capture. You can hear every little nuance when using a condenser microphone. You're going to capture a much wider dynamic range, and that's why a lot of times they sound more pleasing on a vocalist. So let's go ahead and get into this. Like I stated, this is the SM7B. This is a dynamic microphone, very small polar pattern. If I pull off just a little bit, I lose so much proximity. I lose a lot of directness. So when working with a dynamic, you need to stay right up on that mic. I would not suggest putting your mouth right up on the mic, definitely for recording, because that's going to sound terrible. You always want a good at least, half inch to a couple inches off that mic. Be careful with popping. If I do speak directly into the microphone, some P's and B's right there, it captured it pretty good. It took care of those pops, but be careful with that. Another cool thing about the SM7B, it has a very long, sort of slender diaphragm. I can side address here and it still sounds pretty direct. I can go on the side and I'm not going to experience as much popping. I'm talking across the mic. So definitely for voiceover recording, this can be a key technique instead of going direct, which can be a bit nicer sound and drier. If you're having problems with pops, you don't own a pop filter, try going this way. If you can go 45-degree angle or even a 90-degree angle, still capture a very direct sound, but you're speaking more across the mic and you're not going to pop it as much. One nice feature of the dynamic is the resonant frequency. It resonates between 1 and 4K. So that's going to be right at the heart of the human voice. That's why they're very direct. If you have a very busy mix going on, you have a lot of instruments, a lot of big guitars growling in your track, the best way to get a vocal to cut through is maybe try a dynamic, because you're going to get a little narrower of a frequency response and it's resonating around that 1 to 4K. So here's our SM7. As I stated, it needs a lot of gain. Right now, I'm using a Focusrite interface, and I have this preamp almost turned all the way up. I would say it's at about 4 o'clock, if you know what I'm saying, because it starts out at about 7 o'clock on the dial, but if you take it all the way over to 4, that's about where I'm at on the dial right now. So I do have this really gained up, and this pre is handling it pretty well. I'm pretty impressed. So now here's looking at the polar patterns and frequency chart of the SM7B. Notice there's 3 different lines up there on the frequency plot, and that has to do with some switches that are on the back of the SM7B. And this is one feature I feel like people are ignorant to when they use this mic. They're not aware of where they have these switches set, and they make a huge difference in the vocal tone. So right now I have them flat. So this would be the solid line here on the frequency chart. And notice it's very even. There's some bumps up around 5K, a little dip around the 7-8K. That could be for sibilance, and a little bitty bump up there around 10-15K. So we do have some high-end boost in the flat position, so it helps out the human voice. But let's go ahead and kick this presence switch on. If you look at the dotted line here, that dotted line above here, that's the presence switch. That's the boost and top end that you're going to get if you turn on this switch. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this around. And now this is with the presence boost. So now you should hear some more top end than what we had before. And in my honest opinion, this sounds a bit nicer. This is giving me a bit more presence, helping me cut through this ambience a little more. So that's with the presence boost. The other one is a high pass filter. And most mics that I favor tend to come with a high pass option. You want to have that option, especially with vocals. If there's a 40, 50, 60, say 80 hertz high pass filter, I would suggest using it. That's really going to help out with pops. It's going to help out if they bump the stand, if you get some rumble through the floor, if they're stomping their foot, something of that nature. So definitely let's turn on the high pass here. So now this is the high pass on and the presence boost. So this is a wildly different tone than what we had initially with the flat setting for both switches. So I'm just going to leave it here. I think this sounds pretty nice. Notice the puller pattern below it, very tight. Again, if I demonstrate, if I just say, right now I'm right up on the mic, I'm maybe a ½ inch off. Say if I go 3 inches off. Now when I talk, you hear a lot more reflections. Let me go a little farther back even. So it's all reflections now, even that I'm saying maybe 6, 8 inches off this. So with a dynamic, definitely for studio recording, you want that artist right up on the mic, whether it's voiceover, whether it's a singing, keep them tight on the mic, 1 to 2 inches, I'd say. Anything more, then you really start losing proximity. It's really starting to thin out. One last thing, a little tip about the SM7. You can actually detach the foam windscreen. And now this gives just a little bit more sparkle. So you might see some artists working with the SM7 in this manner. I would definitely recommend using a pop filter if you're going to do this, just to keep the shape of the mic better, because if you do have moisture or anything flying out of your mouth, that will coat the diaphragm of your microphone and possibly darken it and make it sound different. So pop filters will help out with this. But this is another technique people do just to brighten that sound just a touch more. I'm going to go ahead and place this back on. There we go. Now we're back with the wind filter on. So here, I'll go back to flat really quick just so we can A/B. And this is the flat setting now. This is with no high pass and no presence boost. So as I stated, it's quite a difference. So please be aware when you use this mic what you have it set on, because if you go to do vocal overdubs, say you do some punches a month later after you initially tracked it, if you have them set different, you're going to have wildly different tones between your takes. So the good old SM7B. Okay, welcome back. I've now set up a Royer 122 MK2 ribbon microphone. Now, you might have learned, at least when I was growing up as a student, as an engineer, that you don't supply 48 volt to a ribbon mic. And that's true of vintage ribbon mics. If you use, like, say, an RCA 44BX, one of the famous older models, never give them phantom power because you could blow that ribbon. Now, in this day and age, we actually have the hybrid. We have the active ribbon microphone. So this is actually an active microphone. This is going to give you a little more gain than a passive ribbon, a little more top end as well. So that makes them a little more desirable for working with vocals. Now, voiceover and a ribbon, this would purely be a throwback feel for trying to do like an old time radio sort of sound. But for vocals, I love ribbons. I love how mellow they are. I love the big just bass sound you get out of them. They're so smooth, so warm. Not warm in like, I'm so tired of that term, but in the tube sense of warm. I just love how just sort of dark and round a ribbon is. And the great thing about a ribbon is I don't typically EQ a vocal, especially during the tracking phase, but an EQ on a ribbon, EQs, they take EQ really well. So if you have a nice EQ after the ribbon mic, you could say add a little 10K with that Pultec, and that will make it a little more condenser-like. Like I stated earlier, ribbons have made a big comeback. You see all types of different companies creating ribbons now, and this one happens to be the Royer here. This was one of the first I would say, of the new wave of ribbon mics that came out over the last 10, 15 years. So this one does require phantom. One neat feature a lot of times about different ribbons is the way the ribbon is angled can produce different tones between the front and back of the mic. As I said, ribbons are figure 8 always, so I'm getting as much behind the mic being captured as it is in front. So we should hear a bit more ambience than what we were hearing with the SM7. If I turn the mic around, let's just flip it. I am now speaking into the back, and it's a bit different tone. It sounds a little boxier, a little more nasally to me. Now I'll go back to the front. And this is back to the front of the mic. So it's a nice natural ambience captured alongside with the direct sound. That's another neat feature of a ribbon. You might have heard a couple pops here. They do have quite the proximity effect, so getting close on it, I can get a lot of low end out of this microphone, pretty direct, but I will have mouth sounds and sibilants. Definitely you're going to experience some popping. So definitely if you're close miking it at all with a ribbon, you're going to have a pop filter. And I don't recommend getting too close on these. I mean, these really shine when you get about 6-8 inches off them and find that sort of sweet spot where you get a nice bit of room tone in with them and just the smooth features of the ribbon as well. So here's a nice example of a ribbon microphone. Okay, looking at the frequency response chart, the graph is much more linear or flat than what we saw with the SM7. We don't see those extreme high mid and high frequency boosts that you noticed with the SM7. So that gives a little bit more of its dark or its round sound. It also starts dipping off around 10K, and drops a few dB all the way up to 15. So they don't have that sparkle or that sheen that we usually hear, that exaggerated high end that you get with condensers and dynamics. So great example of a ribbon here, the Royer 122 Mark II. Okay, let's move on to another type now. Okay, welcome back. I now have a condenser microphone plugged into my interface. You should immediately hear a lot more room ambience as well as a lot more frequency response, especially on the top end. This should sound a lot brighter than the ribbon just did, and definitely a lot more ambient than our initial dynamic microphone sounded. These are so sensitive, they resonate up there in the 8 to 12K range, that they pick up every little nuance. Because of this hyped high end in these microphones, I'd be really careful with ever adding EQ or top end while you track with these. This particular microphone is the Neumann M149, a tube powered microphone. So this microphone has its own power supply. Remember, a microphone with its own power supply, you don't want to give that 48 volts. You could damage the microphone or the power supply itself. This is a reissue of the original M49, which was created, I want to say, in the World War II era. That microphone was only cardioid pattern. This mic right now, I have it set to the cardioid pattern. This mic has a lot of bells and whistles on it. We can go in between any of the 5 patterns or directly onto one of them. So like I said, right now I am on cardioid. It also has an extensive high pass filter. Right now I have it turned to the lowest setting. I have it on 20 hertz. So how about, let's go from cardioid, let's switch this to hypercardioid. And if I go to the next shot here, we can see in the frequency graph, the tone actually changes as we go between the different polar patterns. So if we're looking in the middle here at the cardioid, we see we have our predictable high mid bump and another top end bump here, making it more pleasing for vocals. If we were to switch this up to omnidirectional, where it receives the same signal all the way around the mic, you'll notice it's even brighter. It has a very extensive boost up here in the 10 to 15, 20K range. So I'm going to pause it real quick, and then I'm going to switch this. And when I come back, I will be in omnidirectional. Okay, I'm back now, and this is Omni, and you're definitely hearing a lot more room tone in this pattern compared to the previous. So typically I stay away from using Omni for recording a vocalist. The only time I've ever really seen it used effectively is if you were getting too many pops. Definitely you can get closer in the mic without the crazy proximity that we get when using, say, cardioid or a smaller pattern. A bit more top end than what we were hearing previously on cardioid. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it back to cardioid now. I'm going to pause. All right, now I'm back into cardioid, so definitely a bit more direct than what we were just experiencing, and a little bit less hyped on the top end as compared to omnidirectional. We should go to hypercardioid as well, just to show you what that sounds like. So let's go ahead and pause one more time. Okay, now here I'm back with the hypercardioid, and listening closely, this is pretty dry sound for such a large room that I'm in. So maybe if I had to track, I wanted the nice broad frequency response of my M149 here in the production, then definitely hypercardioid might be the way to go. The thing about hypercardioid though is if I start moving around too much, I really start getting a lot of tone shift and change in my vocal sound. So if you're going to use this setting, definitely make sure you have a disciplined singer or voiceover artist. Make sure they stay right up on this microphone. And for the most part in this lecture, I've been doing, I'd say about almost 3 to 4 inches off this mic, and that'd be about a regular position I would use for a singer if I was close miking. So if I didn't close mic, say I went 8, 10, 12 inches, and you might have to do this if you get a very loud singer. That's the push and pull between room ambience and direct sound. Like, how loud is my singer? How ambient is my room? If I'm in a very ambient room, then I'm probably going to want to get my singer a little closer up on the mic. Not so ambient, I could probably afford to get off it. But if she is very loud, then definitely I'm going to have to pull off the mic and deal with a little bit more of the room tone. So this is the sweet sound of the M149, about a $7,000 mic. So I hope it sounds about $6,000 better than the last 2 mics. But hopefully you'll get to use one of these along your recording adventures. Just a wonderful mic for both female and male voice. So I'm going to pause it here and we'll set up another condenser. I'll be right back. Okay, hi there and welcome back. I've set up another condenser mic. This is the 414 XLS. This is a straight true blue condenser microphone, so it definitely needs 48 volts or you're not going to get any signal. It has a decent amount of output. I probably have this about just over 1 o'clock on my preamp, where remember I had it up about 4 o'clock for the SM7. It was about 3 o'clock for the ribbon. And I forgot to mention for the 149, I only had that at about 11:30 or so. So these condensers give us a good 10, 12 more dB of output right out of the box compared to ribbons and dynamics. So you could get away with a lesser preamp with the superior output from this mic. This mic is very versatile. I've used it on everything from kick drum to the human voice. It works well on a lot of different things. The 414 historically is a very polarizing mic. And what I mean by that is people either love them or hate them. I don't hate. I like the 414. I think it's a good mic, especially if this is all you have in your arsenal. The 414 does a really good job. It's a great, I would say, professional entry-level condenser mic for about $1,000. I mean, that's $6,000 less than the 149 that we just tested out. So pretty good bang for your buck with this microphone. It has all the bells and whistles that the 149 had. It also has a pad as well, so for loud sources you can kick that on. Has a roll-off, has a high-pass filter, as well as 4 different polar patterns. If we look at the graph there, it does have quite a jagged frequency response when we look at the high mids into the top end there. So that's what usually turns people off. This mic has a heavy EQ on it. It does do something to the sound source. It's not as transparent as, say, an Audio-Technica microphone is. This is kind of a different beast. So either this thing is going to work and do something nice for your source, or it's not. So very strong, colorful mic. You can see the different curves there if I were to kick on the different filters. So the 414, very famous mic. One thing to consider with this microphone too is what decade of 414 are you using, because a 414 from the 2010 sounds very different from a 414 from the 1970s. So depending on the model, you are going to get a different sound out of these microphones. This happens to be an XLS. This is a more modern type 414, so it's definitely a bit more hyped on the top end compared to the older models of the 414. So here's this mic, a fine example of just a straight condenser mic. A little less ambience we're getting with this mic compared to the larger diaphragm 149. So it could be definitely a good choice for use in this room if we were going to do some vocals. Okay, let's go check out another mic here. All right, welcome back. And here's a final type of microphone type I want to look at. This is the shotgun microphone. This is a condenser mic. This also has a tube in it. This is a tube condenser, but it does not have its own power supply. So this microphone does require 48 volt phantom. This microphone, a shotgun mic, mainly used in field recording, but has become very popular to use within TV production, commercial production, because of the direct sound, because you can be in a very live, noisy environment, and as long as you direct it specifically near the person's mouth, you're going to get a pretty dry signal. Now, if I get close on this thing, it's probably not what you want to do on a shotgun mic, because you're gonna get some distortion. But if I get about 4 or 6 inches off, I mean, it's a pretty direct sound. So if you're in a terrible environment, this would be a good way to go. But I've seen these even used more and more in voiceover production. Even when you're in a booth that, say, is pretty dry, I've seen people start to use a lot of the shotgun mic technique as opposed to the larger diaphragm condenser microphones that have traditionally been used in voiceover. So right now I'd say about 6 inches off this mic. I'm gonna get even farther. And as long as I stay in that direct path of the microphone, it stays pretty direct. I mean, I'm probably about 18 inches off now. Now I'm maybe 2 feet off the mic, and we're starting to really hear a bit more of the reflections in the room, but definitely you can still get that focus, that high frequency focus of my voice. And if I get a little closer, you could see why these are very directional and very desirable for production fields, especially when you're recording stuff on a sound stage or for a commercial or outside on the street. This can really help pick up the direct sound of somebody's voice. Okay, I'm going to pause it and go back. Let's go back to the 149, and I'll finish off the lecture with our big expensive Cadillac mic here. Okay, I just want to finish up this lecture with a couple final thoughts here. Vocal mic selection. Don't just throw up the most expensive mic and say, hey, this is going to work, and call it a day. You're really going to do your production a disservice if you don't shoot out the sound between a few different mics. You don't have to go hog wild. I mean, 2-3 mics, but cut a bit of dialogue in each, or cut a verse and a chorus on each one, and listen back in the music bed or the track and make the best informed decision of which mic you want to work with. Typically condenser is the king, but that's definitely a reason to break out one of the other microphone types just to be different or unique in your production style. When we're shooting mics out, what should we listen for? The most obvious one being the timbre or the tone. What's the EQ sound like? What's the high end versus the low end? Is it the right balance? Is it a pleasing EQ curve for that vocalist or that voiceover talent? A clean versus colored sound. Do we want coloration? Do we want to use a tube mic like the 149? Or do we want to use something more transparent, say like an Audio-Technica or a Manley microphone? Sibilants and unvoiced consonants. Are we having trouble? Are they cutting through the track too much? Do the F's sound a little crazy with this microphone? Maybe you should try a different angle or a different setup so you can get a more pleasing sound from those unvoiced consonants. And lastly, like we've been talking about this entire lecture, how much room ambience are you going to capture with this mic? Mic placement, in general, I've been staying directly mouth level with the diaphragm for this lecture, and that's definitely the most common miking technique that you see these days. Back in the 60s and the 70s, you used to see a lot more of this. You'd see the mic raised up a bit. And the reason with this being singing below the mic was because a lot of times with LPs and recording to an album, if you had too much low end, you had a pop in the mic that could actually make the album skip. So that was kind of out of necessity. These days, if you are going to go up, you're probably going to angle it down a little bit. And this is a nice technique for a little bit more of a natural sound instead of just that right in your face sound of being even with the diaphragm. And you still see this used quite a bit. This is a very popular technique. If you have the singer standing, this can kind of help induce a little bit better posture if we were to come in from above. So as I said with condenser mics, 4 inches, maybe a fist. Or you can do the hang loose sign, maybe for more like 8 inches. But definitely try to come up with some sort of measurement so you know where to put that singer on the mic every time she steps up to it. Another way we can look at this too is from below. And I've done this with singers, especially if we have somebody that wants to sit down. There's nothing with coming in from below and angling it up. And if they're talking across, you should have some less problems with popping. Really good for dialogue recording. If somebody's sitting down, maybe reading a long form book, coming in from below, maybe get a little more reflection or warmth from the upper body, but definitely a different tone than what we've been experiencing before. I'll go ahead and go back to direct here. Just always be very careful when you're handling a mic of this price. You know, treat it like a newborn baby. All right, so this is back to our direct level. And like I said, this is probably the most common that I've seen in the last 10, 20 years, is usually we're directly even with the diaphragm. The only problem could be with popping, spit sounds, mouth sounds. If you're having problems with that, maybe try going in from above, or do try the side addresses we talked about with the SM7. There's nothing wrong with speaking across the mic a little bit. As long as you're staying close to it, you still should get that same pleasing proximity and EQ curve that you're getting from when you're straight on with the microphone. Okay, that's about all I have left for you. In the next video, we'll get into looking at the vocal chain and setting our preamp, and also playing around with a bit of compression. Thanks for watching.